This is Clark the Knife, and this is the TRM, or Three Rivers Manufacturing, Bulldog. This is the newest release from Three Rivers Manufacturing, the American-based company based up in Massachusetts, also known as Halpern Titanium or Halpern Manufacturing in their OEM work. I think everybody watching this video knows TRM pretty well, and you've probably been seeing some discussion about this upcoming knife, especially if you follow TRM on Instagram, for months to maybe a year now. This is their new, sort of chunkier, sort of thicker, heavier duty bar lock folder. It has just started to come out. They put a couple sprinkles in July. Maybe one or two knives came out in June. They are planning a larger release very soon and to ramp up production of these in August. Honestly, that's probably going to be September based on how TRM tends to hit their timelines. But I'm going to go through this knife as I do with my typical reviews. 3 sections. First, we're going to talk about some specifications. Then we're going to look at the knife tip to tail, sort of look at how it feels in the hand, look at what features it has, things like that, give you a sense for the knife overall. And then we're going to finish with scoring across a 10-point system with sort of GPA scores to give you an overall sense of how I feel. Let's get into it. So the TRM Bulldog here, starting with the specifications. This, like everything TRM, is made in the USA up there in Massachusetts. I believe they manufacture everything in the USA, including the screws and stuff like that, but I may be wrong about the screws. I know the vast majority of this knife, at minimum, is manufactured in the USA. This is a $250 knife, which used to be more expensive than most of TRM's knives. These days, that's pretty typical pricing for TRM. You know, your Neutrons, your Atoms, things like that, now that they're primarily using the contoured scales, tend to hit around that price, a little cheaper than the Shadow. Blade length here is 3.2 inches. Blade stock is 120 thousandths here, which is thick by TRM standards, would be thin by anybody else's standards. The steel here, very interesting choice. BJ75P. I usually give a decent bit of discussion about steels in my reviews. This is one that I will not be able to talk all that much about. I have found very little on BJ75P in my bit of research. I understand that it is a powder metallurgy version of B40 or BG42, which, if you're new to the knife world, you won't even recognize. If you're sort of an old head, you'll recognize as the steel that Chris Reeve used before S30V. Very old steel, BG42. I am not aware of another knife by any custom or production maker that is using BJ75P. I know virtually nothing about its properties. Again, I can presume, because it's a powder metallurgy version of BG42, what its properties might be, but I've got no data to base that on. So I'm going to talk about this steel just a little bit based on my experience, but honestly, it's just a bit of an unknown, and I'm curious why TRM chose this steel rather than 20CV, MagnaCut, something like that. I wouldn't be surprised if they talked about it somewhere, and I'm just ignorant of why, but I am ignorant of most of the details about this steel. Overall, 7 inches long. 3.5 ounces, so not only is this a bit thicker, it's a bit heavier than most TRM knives. Again, 3.5 ounces is not heavy by normal knife standards, but by the standards of TRM knives, which typically are thin and slicey, this is a little thicker and a little chunkier. And as is common with these bar lock knives, this is on phosphor bronze washers. Let's go into some size comparisons. I'm going to do a few more size comparisons than usual because this is such a new knife. The most important size comparison here, which is probably the only basis that a lot of people watching this need, is the TRM Neutron. And you can see when you put this next to the Neutron, it is almost exactly the same in blade length and handle length as the Neutron. To the extent that I'm sure it was designed to be almost exactly the same in this dimension, in this profile. You can see even the blade shapes are very, very similar. Even the handle shapes have a lot of similarity. It's a little bit taller, but you can, I mean, the similarity speaks for itself. The big difference here is when you look at this dimension and you look at the thickness, blade stock, significantly thicker than the Neutron. Again, still not thick by general knife standards, but this is 33% thicker than a typical TRM. And you can see the handle's also much thicker. You put them butt to butt, and you can see this is almost a full scale thicker than the Neutron. If I compare this to the Atom, if you're somebody that does not have a Neutron, you can see quite a bit shorter, not even quite a bit, but a decent bit shorter than the Atom in both the blade length and the handle length. Same difference in profile, because the profile on the Atom and the Neutron are the same, quite a bit thicker than your Atom. Let's compare some other brands. Let's start with our small Sebenza. And you can see here it is very similar in blade length and very similar in handle length, while being sort of taller than your small Sebenza. Blade thickness, it looks thicker than the Sebenza. In truth, this is about the same thickness, blade thickness, as a small Sebenza. Because Chris Reeve crowned this blade, it looks thinner than it is. So, you know, the stock on a small Sebenza is around this 120 thousandths that they have on the Bulldog. And you can see, in terms of thickness, a little bit thicker than the small Sebenza. But again, it's worth emphasizing, even though this Bulldog is a thick knife by TRM standards, it's still a pretty average knife in terms of thickness and weight and blade thickness by the standards of the rest of the knife industry. Compare this to a large Sebenza, and you can see here quite a bit smaller, as you would expect. Compare this to your PM2, and there you go. Again, I mean, the PM2 does dwarf it, as you might expect. Compare it to a Delica. Very similar in overall blade length and handle length to the Delica. Again, thicker blade stock. Your sort of Atom and Neutron blade stock and overall thickness is similar to the Delica. So this is thicker. And then one more common one. That's pulling a bug out. Similar in size to a bug out in blade length and handle length, while being taller and thicker. So basically, you know, lengthwise, this fits in that sort of general smaller EDC kind of size range, where you typically see things like your Delica, like your bug out, like your Neutron. It is squarely in that range in terms of length. And again, while it is thick by TRM standards, it is not thick by knife industry standards. While it is heavy by TRM standards, it is not heavy by knife industry standards. It's because TRM tends to make their knives very thin and slicey. They made a more sort of typical average kind of knife here. You know, this is similar to your Native in terms of thickness and blade thickness and stuff like that. So let's go through the features here. This blade shape, sorry about that noise. Blade shape, again, very similar to the Neutron, a little bit taller. This is your standard sort of leaf-shaped blade with a tip that is right in line with the pivot. Big drop point, nice even curve across the back. This cool swooping plunge that TRM tends to do. Belly all the way from the base to the tip. This is just a simple, functional blade shape. This is similar in design, not only to your Neutron, but it's got a little bit more drop, but it is, you know, generally similar to what you see with a Chris Reeve drop point, things like that, with a little bit of a lower tip. This is just a really good everyday blade shape. Pierces pretty easily. It does come down to a fairly thin tip while still having that decently thick blade stock there. That makes it so you can, you know, pierce and stab with a little bit more confidence than you would with something like a Neutron. Because you got belly all the way through here, it does do your slicing cuts, your drag cuts, your pull, your cuts where you're passing through material more gradually and trying to keep that blade in the cut. It does all of those very well. Honestly, there's not a ton to say about this blade shape other than the fact that it is simply very good, very versatile, and good at just about everything. That was true with the Neutron. It's true here, and if anything, this blade is a little taller. So you do get a little bit more space to drop. So they made a good choice here. Go with a simple, versatile blade shape. There is nothing that you try to use this for that you will find it lacking. And honestly, it will be quite good at everything it does while being quite attractive. You know, TRM does a very nice stone wash on everything here. You can see, you can't even see the little like stone marks or anything like that. It's just pleasant, very nice etching on the TRM, or engraving on the TRM logo there. It's attractive. It's an attractive logo. Very nice laser etching here, simple like Futura, something like that on the font, but it's clean, it's simple. TRM USA B75P. Let's talk about this blade stock. So 120 thousandths on the blade stock here, but this does have a decent bit of space to drop, and if you look at that plunge there, you can see, and then if you look sort of down the barrel of the blade, you can see when you look at that ricasso there, this has, again, more space to drop than your Neutron, just because the blade is a little taller, and it comes down to a very nice thin edge. This knife this is still the factory edge. This is a knife that I never felt the need to reprofile the edge like I typically do. This thing has been shockingly slicey out of the box. I expected when I was getting this knife, again, 120 thousandths is not thick in terms of blade stock. We're still talking, thinner than a PM2, same as a small Sabenta, stuff like that, but I expected that it would not have the same sublime cutting performance as something like a Neutron. And it is not as insanely slicey as your favorite Neutron, as your favorite Atom, things like that. But this is still, because of the depth of this grind, and again, 120 thousandths, not that thick in terms of stock, this is still one of the sliciest knives that I have. If I compare this to my Sabenza, this is slicier than my Sabenza. If I compare this to my Native, this is slicier than my Native. This blade shape, combine that with this nice even belly and this very sharp bitey edge, this cuts into everything you want very, very easily and effortlessly. Glides through cardboard, glide through paper. The tip is low enough that it's easy to get it down for utility cuts, dry cuts, things like that. This thing has been wonderful out in the garden for plant material, for more delicate stuff, flower stems, leaves, things like that. This edge bites into that material really well. It's a nice clean edge, a nice clean blade shape. It continues to glide through that material very easily. Honestly, this has been almost an ideal EDC blade in the sense that functionally it has just been effortlessly and surprisingly good at literally everything that I have tried to use it for. There is not a single knife that I can think of in actually quite a while that has been a new knife that I've used that has been quite as effortlessly good at everything that I have tried EDC wise as this particular blade shape. The additional blade stock that you've got here does give you a greater sense of toughness, a greater sense of sort of strength than you have with the super skinny blade, especially super skinny tip on your Neutron. This is a delicate knife. This is a very slicey knife, but this is a knife that, rightly so, you would be hesitant to push, hesitant to use aggressively. The Bulldog feels thick enough that you can push it. I can push this into a tree branch or like a flower or like a hardened flower stem or something, a bush or something like that. I can push this into some carpet. I can push this into some double wall cardboard that might have some staples in it and things like that. And I don't have to worry about either tweaking the tip or potentially, fracturing the blade somewhere or even, chipping the edge, stuff like that. I don't have to worry about that with the Bulldog as much as I did with the Neutron. But the difference in slicing performance between the Bulldog and the Neutron is very, very small, surprisingly small. Again, considering it's got 30% thicker stock. And part of that, let me just put these sort of on top of each other so you can see. If you put the Neutron blade there, you can see it's only like 1/8 of an inch, but this is a taller blade. And I think, honestly, the fact that they made the blade on the Bulldog a little bit taller does go a good way to offset the consequence of that thicker blade stock at least a little bit. And so you end up getting kind of the best of all worlds. You get a blade that is still very, very slicey, but is tougher. Opening method. They went with an opening hole on this one, or at least a slot, rather than a thumb stud, as they typically do. The opening hole, very nicely done. It is slightly knocked down all around. It's very pretty. Fits on the blade very nicely, just aesthetically pleasing. When you open it, fits right there, very naturally positioned. Because of the slot, you can put your thumb anywhere here, nicely oriented relative to the pivot. You can flick it out if you want to, and we're going to talk about that issue there in a minute. But honestly, this feels like a slow roller where you can just get your thumb in there, roll it out nicely and easily. It works fine. It is a sort of neither impressive nor unimpressive opening hole. It works just fine. There's no jimping really anywhere on the knife. Technically, you could call this jimping if you want to on your backspacer here. And you know, this is G10. So G10, 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 G10 everywhere. I'm pretty sure these are steel on the liners. They might be titanium. I probably should have looked that up. But, you know, the opening hole works just fine. Again, the plunge, very nice. The stonewash, very nice. This does have a full finger choil, which again has helped with the ergonomics. It has helped with this knife feeling very tough. This grip here, where you get your front finger, and let's just transition to ergos, where you get your front finger into this choil here, and then you have the rest of your fingers along the body. Very secure grip. This feels a lot like the Native in hand, where you have a small knife that really does sort of feel very, very secure, very locked in. This is a big enough choil, at least for my large size gloved hands, which means that I've got hands on the smaller side. My finger fits nicely in this choil, very secure. I can post my thumb up on here. I can get lots of power over the cut, lots of power over the blade. I can pinch the blade nicely, post my middle finger into that choil, grab the blade when I want to use more delicate work. This works very nicely. Again, this nice thin edge really helps with those delicate precision cuts. And then if I want more distance, I can get all 4 fingers on this handle. You got a big front finger index here, nice gradual swoop all the way across the back. Pretty neutral handle, but it does have some contours here. This feels comfortable. And you don't feel too far from the blade in this one. It isn't such a huge front finger choil that this still feels comfortable. Onto the handle here, you've got, and actually, no, I'll just point out, because that's where my brain was going. It is more of a front finger choil than you get on something like the Neutron. You know, this front finger choil, it's there, but this always felt, you know, a little sort of scavy almost because it's so shallow. They have gone deeper with that choil on the Bulldog, and the ergonomics of the knife are better for it. These handle scales here, this is black G10. You got a light peel ply texture all across the surface there. 1, 2, 3 screws. 1, 2, I guess that's, you know, that's a pivot screw, but it's still there. 1, 2, 3, 4 screws. This seems like it's going to be like the Shadow in that it will not have TRM's hot swappable scales that seem to be consistent with their bar lock designs. This is the only version that's come out now. They did just announce on Instagram today they will be coming out with Earth Brown G10 and carbon fiber. I'm sure if this model does well, there will be plenty of variations, as they eventually did with the Shadow. Handle here, it's sort of a medium peel ply texture. There is plenty of grip here, similar in sort of grippiness to your PM2. Flat handle scale, relatively generous chamfer all the way around the edge there. Very nice. Nice big flat. These are pretty thick G10 scales here. Again, G10 geared back spacer right there, which is cool. Meets very nicely on the butt there. You got full liners. Again, I should have looked up whether these are steel or titanium. I'm not entirely sure. Liners go up here. The fact that this looks anodized leads me to believe it's probably titanium. But I do not know that for certain. There is no internal milling on the liners. And then you've got the bar lock here. Very similar in design, a little more conventional than the bar lock you saw on the Shadow. You can see you've got sort of these concentric discs here. Very nice and easy to grip and disengage. This is a nice and grippy little way to access the bar lock here. And this bar lock is, like with the Shadow, stiff enough that you can really operate it with just one finger if you want to, or you can pull it back with both fingers. This knife right now, it looks like they have only milled out this pocket here for right hand carry, or for right side carry. I'm sure over time they will make some lefty versions. I think they said that 10% of the upcoming drop will be lefty versions. But in addition to not having the hot swappable scales, this also doesn't have the sort of ambidextrous nature that you sometimes see on some other TRM knives. Let's see, though I guess that's a little less common than it used to be anyway. So that's, I guess last thing here, you can see there's your bar lock, there's sort of the scales extending out here to show the housing for your bar lock mechanism. One last pass on the fit and finish. You can see that everything is nice and flush all around. No jimping. The blade meets nicely into the handle. All your screws are nicely flush or slightly proud, intentionally so in the case of the pivot screw. It's all pretty typical with TRM. So this ends up being a very, it's kind of like what you would expect with a knife named the Bulldog. There's nothing pretty about it. There's nothing exciting about it. It is aggressively utilitarian in the blade design, in the handle design, in the way it feels in the hand. But as a result, this thing, it is a very, very impressive user of a small knife. This feels honestly very similar, and in some ways even a little bit better than the experience that I started to have when I got a small-to-midsize, where this is a knife that, like, when I just want a knife that can do pretty much everything and can do that pretty much everything well. My only hate with the small-to-midsize, I hate the way it sits on the table. But this is a knife that can do everything and will do everything well. There are lots of knives that can do everything, not lots, but there are some knives that can do everything, but do everything in sort of a mediocre to good range. This Bulldog does every single EDC task that you would want a 3.2 inch blade to do, and it does them all well, outright well. The ergonomics are very confidence-inspiring. The blade is both relatively tough and very slicey. It's just really, really well designed from a utilitarian perspective. And so let's get into those scores. And this is going to be more of a mixed bag than my comments would suggest, but that is a consequence of both my scoring system and a couple things that I intentionally haven't mentioned yet because I'm going to get into them in this scoring system here. So again, I score knives across 10 categories, 5 related to sort of the fun factor, the knife enthusiast characteristics, and 5 related to the function of the knife. First, let's go through the fun factor, blade design. So blade design, I'm calling a B. This is a very solid, pretty knife design. It is very aesthetically nice in the sense that, this grind is beautifully done. The way the ricasso just smoothly the plunge smoothly transitions into the blade there is very pretty. The stonewash is very nice. All the etchings and engravings are very well done. The opening hole balances the overall design nicely. There's a sort of implied symmetry between the opening hole and the slot the bar lock operates in. And on top of that, as I've said ad nauseum by this point, this is a super, super useful blade shape. In fact, I have half a mind. I think I'm going to make a game time decision here, and I'm going to change this to a B+, because honestly, it's a basic blade design, but it works really, really well. You combine that with the update that they've made to your finger choy here, it's just a pleasure to use. And even though it's a little bit basic, this is kind of like your native. And in fact, at the end of this review, I'll dig out my native. Because this really does give me the same sort of feel as when I started using the native, in that this is a blade shape that is aesthetically very nice, but that you really start to appreciate the beauty of it when you use it because it just works so damn well. I do expect on the steel, we're either going to get more information over time about B75P, or I kept calling it BJ75P, I don't know why. B75P, we're going to start getting more information about it over time, I'm sure. And I also wouldn't be surprised if TRM starts putting these out in MagnaCut, 20CV, stuff like that. They did mention on the site that this is their first production steel. So that indicates that future productions will probably be a different steel. The steel has been fine in my use. It has held this factory edge well. Again, the edge is ground so thin that it could probably lose quite a bit of sharpness at the edge and still cut very well. I certainly have not noticed any loss in performance, and I've, used this pretty aggressively. I have really wanted to push this knife over a decent number of days, so it's holding up as well as any other steel I have used from TRM to that extent. So blade design, B. Handle design, I'm going to call it B-. The fact is, the handle design by itself is very good, very functional, but it is admittedly very basic. This whole knife does have a sort of feel, it screams kind of like CJRB to me from a visual perspective. It's basic. There's nothing unusual or impressive about the way this handle is designed, but it's all executed very well. You've got a nice, even belly here, lots of space for 3 to 4 fingers based on how big your hands are. Again, I really like the way that they deepen this front finger trawl. Nice, even sway across the back. I do like slightly sharper corners like this on the butt because it does give a little bit more purchase in your palm if you are gripping further back. It's versatile in a bunch of different grips. This chamfer is very nice and even the whole way around. Nice big flat so it doesn't roll in the hand. It's visually fine, functionally very useful. It's a B-. It's a little bit boring, but it's fine. There's nothing ugly about it. There's nothing unattractive. There's no flaws. There's just nothing interesting. Action, C+. So this is TRM's second try at the bar lock. The first one being the Shadow, which again, I think most people watching this review have either owned a Shadow or at least know about the Shadow. That was a much bigger blade. The fact is, this bar lock works quite well in general, and I'll get to the caveat in a second. So flicking, you got a decent detent right here, and when you open it, it's got that rubbery detent typical of a bar lock, but it is fine, it is satisfying enough, and then when you release this bar lock, as is typical for a good bar lock, it will pretty much drop shut. You can also pull the bar lock back and flick it out. So if you've been watching my other reviews, you'll notice C+ is quite low for a bar lock. Why? So let me flick this out and I'll show you why. You hear that? Not there. And this has started to go away, as is typical, but there it is. Boom. This bar lock here, and you can see at your interface point there, this thing has had more and worse lock stick than any bar lock I have ever encountered. And it is lock stick. Now, like all lock stick, it has broken itself in, but off the bat, this probably had the worst. No, there was one, I can't remember what it was, one knife that had worse lock stick, but this is honestly the second worst lock stick that I have ever encountered on any knife ever. There have been multiple times when I have flicked this knife open that the lock stick has been so, and you hear that lock stick, that the lock stick has been so bad that I have literally had to hold this knife, hold the blade with one hand, and then use the full force of my other hand just to try to disengage the lock. There was one time that it stuck. I didn't know if I was going to be able to get the knife unlocked. I mean, I literally got to the point where I was kind of skeeved out with how hard I was having to grip the blade. I was afraid of slipping and cutting myself just to try to get the damn lock disengaged. This is a fine bar lock when it is broken in, but it has a actually unacceptable level of lock stick, at least my version. It has broken itself in, it has started to work itself in, it has started to go away over time, but boy oh boy, if you are getting a fresh from factory Bulldog and your experience is anything like this one, be prepared for lock stick that makes your Strider or Emerson look like it has great lock geometry. The lock stick has been absolutely incredible on this, and it is both a little bit unsafe and most importantly just super frustrating. So the best I can give it is a C plus in that once it's broken in, this is a solid, B action. It's a standard bar lock. It works just as a bar lock should, but boy, oh boy, that lock stick is notably bad. I usually don't penalize knives too much for stuff that is bad when it comes from the factory that breaks in quickly, but this took a little bit too long to break in, and it was really, really bad when it came to me. Fit and finish, B minus. I am not... Because I penalize them for the lock stick in the action, I'm not penalizing them that much again on the fit and finish for that lock stick, because that would be sort of double jeopardy in a little bit. The fact is, fit and finish here is fine. This is an unambitious knife in terms of fit and finish. Most of the impressive part is on this blade. I've already talked about how nicely this blade is finished, every part of it done very well. A little bit of knocking down, a little bit of knocking down, finish, all that, great. This handle design, it's a flat scale with a light peel ply and a chamfer the whole way around. Everything is flush, everything is nice and even, but the fact that there's no internal milling here, and the fact that it is just a very unambitious handle design from a manufacturing perspective, again, this feels like a handle design that you would see from a design perspective on a much cheaper knife, on, sort of the CJRB, stuff like that tend to sit in the, sub $100 range. Everything on this is done well. Your machining is fully competent. It's exactly what you would expect from TRM throughout, but I can't give it any better than a B minus just because there's just not that much complexity in the fit and finish here. It's fine with the exception of the lock stick, which is unacceptable, but there's nothing impressive. Cool factor, I'm going to call a C+. Honestly, for a lot of people, it's probably a C. This is a boring knife design. This is a utilitarian knife. This is black G10, stonewash blade. The bar lock is kind of cool, but bar locks are becoming very, very commonplace these days. It's nice. There's nice gradual... I really love this sort of arc across the back that TRM has with their knives. It's pleasant. It's fine. There's 1,000 other knives that look very similar to this, most of which are significantly cheaper. This looks like something from Sencut, maybe Civivi. This looks like a budget knife when you just look at it. When you look closely, you see that the fit and finish is significantly better, but there's nothing that is cool about this knife aesthetically. You gain an appreciation for it as you use it. And any cool factor that is here, again, it's very much like the Spyderco Native in the sense that this is a knife that you learn to love as you use it because it just works so damn well that you start to appreciate the design and the functional aspects of the design. But there's nothing visually cool or exciting about this. This is a C plus bordering on a C. I'm giving it to that plus because, again, I think a lot of people will have the same experience that I had, which is as you use this knife, you start to sort of see it as cool just because it works really well and it's so pleasant to have for that reason. So fun factor comes out to a B minus, which honestly feels more like a C plus, honestly. I'm giving it a lot of points because it does work so well. That does add to the fun factor. For me, a utilitarian-focused knife owner and user, for somebody who's sort of the fidget factor type, that's going to be an even lower score for you because there's nothing exciting or interesting about this knife if you're not planning to use it. Once you do use it, it becomes much more interesting. Same reason that, a lot of people will love their Delicas and find their Delica to be cool and interesting, not because there's anything cool about the Delica, but because once you use a Delica a lot, you come to appreciate the fact that you just got a really useful blade on you all the time. Same sort of thing here. Which brings us over to the function side of things where, as you would expect from my comments so far, the Bulldog excels. Cutting is an A. It's not an A+. There are slicier knives out there. But this blade stock works really, really well with a TRM grind. They did a really good job by making this grind a little bit taller, by keeping this very natural shape here, and just by the depth that they brought this flat grind down. This cuts even better than I expected. There is not a significant loss in cutting performance between this and the Neutron, except in the sliciest of tasks. But you do get a lot more robustness. Very impressed with the cutting performance of the Bulldog. Absolutely an A. Only not an A+, because I do reserve that A+ in cutting performance for the few truly exceptional knives out there in terms of cutting performance, most of which are in either the custom or the very high-end production realm. Utility. This is an A. This one is legitimately very close to being an A+. This is very close to an ideal 3.2-inch knife for general use. Every single task that I tried to use this for, whether it was cutting through boxes, whether it was, going through twine, zip tie, things like that, cutting open some bags, doing a lot of gardening work, doing just work and chores around the house, a little bit of rope, a little bit of twine, stuff like that. The ergonomics are fantastic. The blade is just robust enough. This thing was just a joy to use. The only frustrating part was that lock stick there sometimes made it frustrating to actuate, but it's good at everything. This handle is super versatile. I already showed you can climb up, climb down the handle. This blade shape just does everything well. I think I made all my points 2 or 3 times by this point. This is a very near perfect 3.2-inch design when it comes to just how useful is the knife. I certainly do not know how you would improve on this other than some obvious things that would just purely increase the price. Would it be a little bit nicer with a hollow grind? Cool, yeah. Could you make these scales a little more complicated, contour them a bit more? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, the benefit of, I'm sort of getting into feel here, the benefit of this chamfer, the peel ply, these big flats, is it does all contribute to how secure this feels in the hand. This does have the same feel as my Spyderco Native in that it is a knife, especially in this primary choked up grind. This thing ain't going anywhere. You can push this really hard with confidence. You can pinch it here, grab, drag, pull. It doesn't want to move in the hand. And so this ends up being a 3.2-inch knife that you can push quite hard, quite aggressively. So now, I've sort of gone through utility and feel. I really think this is an extraordinarily well-designed knife for your everyday tasks. Utility and feel are both squarely A's. Again, that utility piece, I'm very close to giving that an A+, because I'm having a hard time of thinking of other knives that are markedly better in terms of utility at this size range. It is very much up there with the small Sebenza, with the Spyderco Native in the best and most recommendable knives from a pure utility perspective in the 3.2-inch range. Carry A-. This is where I think everybody, myself included, needs a bit of a reset. TRM is sort of selling this, and the Bulldog name implies, as a bit of a thicker, chunkier knife. The fact is, this is still 3.5 ounces for 3.2 inches of blade. And, thickness-wise, you're not talking that much thicker than you're talking a little bit thicker, but not that much thicker. About a scale, but it's not like it's huge compared to a small Sebenza. It's not that much bigger in the pocket. And the small Sebenza is unusually good carry. You compare this to something like a PM2, which is the same thickness as a PM3, you're talking the same overall thickness as a PM2. It's a bit thicker in the scales and a bit thinner in the blade, but it comes out to about the same thickness as your PM2, PM3. So you combine that with the fact that this blade does fold very neatly into the handle here, and it's still not a big knife. The peel ply texture is light enough that it doesn't rip up your pants or anything like that. This is just a knife that doesn't make its presence known that much in the pocket. It's an A- because it's nowhere near as thin, light, and easy to carry as something like your Neutron, or even something like a Bug Out or anything like that. But this is one of those knives that I could carry all day. It wouldn't even really notice that I have a knife on me until I took it out to use it. A-, and by the way, TRM's clip here remains a very, very good deep carry clip. Easy to slip in and out of the pocket, which does contribute to the strength of that carry. Value. So value, I'm going to give a C+. And the value on TRM is starting to get a little more challenging. Value is tough here because I'm very much of two minds. From a materials perspective, with the unacceptable level of lock stick and with the fact that this is a G10 knife in a sort of unknown steel a little bit that is thoroughly unambitious from a machining and fit and finish perspective. $250 for this knife puts it significantly above anything Spyderco. You know, if you anything Spyderco does in this range without getting into their premium stuff. Again, I've mentioned the Native so many times. This is 30% more expensive than a Native, which is a very similar knife in terms of fit, finish, and materials. At least, you know, your Native lightweights are the more, it's probably about $50 more expensive than a Native in G10. Probably about $70 more expensive than a lot of your Native lightweights, sometimes even a bit more than that. It does start to feel a little bit expensive when you look at the fit, finish, and materials that you've got here, especially when those Natives that get more expensive tend to be bringing more premium steels. But on the value perspective here, while $250 does feel a little expensive for what you're getting, you know, I can stomach it a little bit more for something like the Neutron when you're getting the contoured scales, when you're getting Magna Cutter 20 CV, things like that, and when you are getting a knife that is more just sort of unusual in some of its specifications. I also, C- is starting to feel a little, I'm going to make it a B, or C+, I'm going to make it a B-, doesn't change the overall score. It's also very hard for me to tell you another knife at $250 that is going to give you more value in terms of utility and performance. If you have the ability to spend $250 on a 3.2-inch pocket knife, there are no knives that are going to be markedly better than this one at the 3.2-inch size range at or below that price point. And honestly, you're having to go pretty much all the way up to a Sebenza to get something that I would say is significantly better, more versatile, anything like that. And even then, you're not getting that much more utility with a Sebenza than you are with this once it breaks in. So value, adjust that from a C+ to a B-. $250 is getting up there for G10, sort of unknown steel, very basic fit and finish, but you're getting an enormous amount of utility for that $250. So function, A-. Again, if I change a couple of these scores, this could get very close to an A. That's about as good as a $250 production knife is going to do on these functional characteristics. You do have to start going up to like custom level stuff to get your A+ here. And I do have to keep those A+ for that custom level stuff because it would be disingenuous to them to say that this cuts or has utility on the same level as like a John Gray Rostrum, something like that. But this is a really exceptional user. This is a really exceptional knife when it comes to functionality. And that gives it a B+ overall. And you can see it's very much a tale of two chunks. There's nothing that fun. There's nothing that interesting about this knife. There's nothing about the visual of it, the design of it that is exciting, especially if you're just sort of somebody who doesn't care about the use of your knife, that mostly sees knives as fidget toys, things like that. But if you are a user, this really immediately goes into the upper pantheon of exceptional user knives. I mean, you're putting stuff like your small Sebenza. This is absolutely as good a knife for me. Again, if they get that lock stick figured out, it is as good a knife and fits a noticeably different role than your Neutron. Let me see. There it is. I've got my good old patented, meaning I left this out. I've got my patented Native 5. Let's just do, since I mentioned it so many times, this is really the most operative comparison here. This does feel like the closest thing to what the Native did. In that this is, you can see the similarities in the overall design. They are very apparent. The lines are very similar. The feel in the hand is very similar. It is a more expensive knife than the Native in most configurations. I can't necessarily justify that expense from a fit and finish perspective, but the grind is just as good, if anything a little bit better. The feel in the hand is just as good or anything a little better. You guys might remember from my Native review, which was one of my earliest reviews, this is one of my favorite, most recommendable 3-inch knives, and the Bulldog now sits right alongside that, particularly if you're the sort of person who's like, I love the design of the native, but for some reason I don't like the backlock, or I don't want FRN, and I don't want to get aftermarket scales, stuff like that, because if you get aftermarket scales, this starts to get quite expensive. You want the feel of a native, and you want some things that are different. The Bulldog is the close thing you're going to find. This is similar in blade stock, similar in handle profile, similar in feel, and just as exceptional. I probably repeated myself too many times in this review, but it really just is worth emphasizing how good this boring little knife is from TRM. This truly is immediately and obviously one of the best 3.2 inch user knives out there. I have been impressed with every single thing I've used it for, and it is now one of those knives where it's like, hey, you know, if you had to reduce your collection down to just a handful of knives, this is probably going to be one of those knives that is in there, at least right now. Question that a lot of people might have is, if I've got the Neutron, do I need the Bulldog as well? I might do a separate video just on this that are for people that are looking for an answer to that specific question. But I do think that these knives are differentiated enough that it absolutely, you can justify having both in your collection. The Neutron, and this is the Mike Erie hollow ground version, the Neutron is super thin, super sleek, super light. I think everybody knows and loves the Neutron by this point, or at least everybody knows it, and a lot of people love it. This is chunkier, thicker, more robust, more suited to be sort of a versatile, general, everyday. You know, the Neutron does get a little thin, a little skeevy for your more aggressive around the house, garden, you know, home improvement chores, things like that. The Bulldog is probably tough enough for anything you would want to throw a 3.2 inch blade at. And so it is nice to have that difference. The bar lock versus the liner lock, take it or leave it. I would like this knife just as well if it was a liner lock. I consider the bar lock, you know, neutral. I'm going to assume they get that lock stick fixed over time with more production runs. I do have to keep in mind that this is literally the second production run, and the first production run was like 5 knives. So I am getting one that is very early in the Bulldog's production. And so the issues that I had with the action, with the fit and finish, I would not be surprised if those get fixed over time. TRM does have a history of their very first knives in a series having some issues. They had some early issues with the shadow. They had some early issues with the, actually really just with the shadow, but they had a lot of issues in the production of the Bulldog, in the sense that I know this took them longer to get to the market than they thought. So those issues might get solved over time. I think I've said everything that I need to say about the Bulldog. It's a really, really good knife. I thought that I would like it because I like TRM's other knives, but honestly, I have loved it so far. The blade is just really, really, really good. And it truly belongs in that pantheon of some of the best 3 to 3.5 inch knives out there. So if you get a chance to get one of these and you're okay spending $250 primarily for utility, and you don't care so much that the materials might not justify that, and the sort of complexity of the design might not justify the $250, but if you're paying $250 to get a great user that will do tasks better than anything else at $250 at this size range, you're going to be really, really happy with the Bulldog. Got a little rambly there at the end. Hope you stayed with me. Hope you found this useful. Let me know if there are any other knives that you would like me to look at. Let me know your thoughts in general. If you've had experiences with the Bulldogs, let me know down in the comments. Again, hope you found this useful. Hope you have a great rest of your day. This has been Clark the Knife with the Bulldog.